Now that your entire base assembly is complete, it's now time to construct the middle section of the clock. Draw and cut out two squares 3/4 of an inch wide by 2 3/8 of an inch tall. These will be parts G. Now draw and cut out two thin strips, both 1/8 of an inch wide and 2 3/8 of an inch long. These will be parts H. Now draw and cut out two shorter strips, both 3/16 of an inch wide and 1 inch long. These will eventually be parts I. Now draw and cut out one large piece, 1 1/8 of an inch wide by 2 3/8 of an inch tall. This will be part J. Now both parts H and I will eventually be glued to the edges of parts G to form the decorative front trim of the clock. Take a look at the circular shapes which have been sanded into parts I. This was done by wrapping a small piece of sandpaper around the middle of a thick highlighter I had on hand and using it as a tool to sand perfectly symmetrical half circles into the centers of the parts. You can do the same, or you can just leave the parts as is. Okay, now very carefully glue the pair of parts H and parts I together on a perfectly flat surface, forming basically a picture frame. If you have an actual metal square handy, it'd be very handy to use as a backstop to ensure your parts are perfectly square. Now I'm stressing alignment here since this project is tall and skinny, and it's pretty easy to tell if it's leaning one way or another. So you want to make sure you have these angles perfect. Now when your picture frame is dried, gently sand the smoothest side of it by gently moving it up and down and around evenly on a very fine flat sheet of sandpaper until the front is perfectly smooth. You can then glue parts G to the back of the frame, being careful to keep the angles at 90 degrees all around. While the glue is still semi-pliable, rest this piece directly on top of your bottom section to make sure it dries in a position in which the molding piece it rests upon shows equally all along the bottom. Piece J is the back of the box and it fits between your two G side parts. Don't glue it in as it needs to be removable. Right now, just set it in place to help make sure that your box is perfectly centered upon your base and dries in the correct position, and sand and shape wherever necessary. Now after your box is dried, glue a tiny strip of wood anywhere on the outside of piece J. This is to act like a small handle and helps you to remove the piece after the top has been installed. If you wish, you can also just nick off a small section of one of the top corners to enable you to stick a paper clip into the hole and pry out the piece whenever necessary. Now it's time to install the top to this section. Draw and cut out a box 1.5 inches long and 15/16 wide. This will be part K. This piece will act as a decorative molding piece between the middle and top portion of the clock, but also as a platform for your Metal Clockworks to rest upon. Incidentally, you can draw all over this piece as it won't be visible. Now draw a 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch box on part K, 7/8 of an inch from the front center of the piece. You can see how I ruled and drew out my lines in the photo. This made the process pretty easy. My first line was drawn right down the center of the piece, which was 12/16 of an inch from each side edge. This helped me to ensure my center box was really centered. Okay, now draw two 3/16 of an inch by 3/16 of an inch squares, starting 3/16 of an inch from the back of the piece, with the inside edge of each square 1/4 inch from the center line. And I know that that is a lot of measurements. Just feel free to rewind if necessary. Now just cut along your lines until your boxes can be pressed out and discarded. Again, just use easy multiple passes along the lines. There's no need to break the tip off your blade. Of course, wear safety glasses while doing this. And here is your completed component. Now just round over both top and bottom edges of this piece, but not the back, remembering that the front is a side with the single box. Now glue this piece on top of your clock, making sure to be careful with the glue and also making sure not to glue the piece to the back removable section of your box. You'll just be applying glue to the top of the 3 sides. The piece needs to be flush with the back of the clock and overlap the clock evenly on both sides and front. Now it's time to install the simulated glass into your clock. Remove the back panel and set it aside. Grab your transparent report cover or other thin clear plastic and cut out a section 2 3/8 of an inch tall by 1 1/8 of an inch wide. Slide this into your clock from the back up against the inside of your picture frame. Trim it to fit as necessary. It should fit snugly enough that it remains in place on its own and you won't have to glue it. Now it's time for the Metal Clockworks. Draw and cut out a 1/8 of an inch wide and 2 1/8 of an inch long strip. This will be the clock's pendulum shaft. Now using the very tip of your X-Acto blade, remember your eye protection, stand your knife in the center of this strip 1/8 of an inch from the end. Gently spin your knife around at this point. You're essentially just using your knife as a drill. If you have a drill bit whose shaft is the thickness of a paper clip, however, that's definitely what you want to use. That'll be a lot easier. Now once your knife has penetrated the strip halfway through, repeat this process from the back of the strip. Don't go all the way through from the front or your holes will probably end up too large. The purpose of this is to make sure we don't split the strips open on the ends when we install parts into these holes later as shown in the photo. Now there aren't a lot of grandfather clock pendulum shafts made from wood, so we're going to have to paint this piece. The shaft in the photo is painted using a mixture of a couple old metallic paints I had on hand. I experimented mixing them together until I was able to find a tone which quasi-matched the brass thumbtack purchased at the hobby shop. When your piece has been painted and is dry, stick your thumbtack through one of the holes you've drilled. It should fit nice and snug. You can also clip the pointy end of the thumbtack off if you wish. The last components of this middle section are the counterweights. Cut off 2 pieces of dowel, both pieces being around 7/8 of an inch long. Now clip off a piece of your decorative chain roughly 2 3/4 of an inch long. Using the tip of your X-Acto blade, and always remember your eye protection, spin it around on top of one of the dowels, essentially drilling a small hole into the top of the dowel. The hole needs to be wide enough and deep enough that you can press in the last link of your chain snugly into the hole. The best method is to use the fingernails of one hand to hold the last link in place partially in the hole and use a hard tool in the other hand in order to force the link down all the way into the hole so it's snug. If you wish, you can use super glue or wood glue to secure the links, but I found that the chain does stay fixed within the dowels if it's pressed in well enough. Now just do the same with your other dowel and the other end of the chain. Now you can paint your dowels to match your pendulum or even a different color if you wish. Now it's time to install your clock components. Insert one end of the pendulum shaft up through the bottom of piece K through the center square. You may need to enlarge the square a touch in order for the pendulum shaft to slip through. The piece can be secured in place by clipping a small piece of your paper clip and sliding it through the hole in the part of the pendulum shaft sticking above the surface of part K. Your dowels, now referred to as counterweights, can both be slid down the remaining squares you have in your clock. Enlarge the squares if necessary. You can now adjust the relative heights of each counterweight to meet your taste. Your clock should now look like the image in the photo. Again, the position of the counterweights is to your own taste.